Set 10 is finally here, and we get to finally talk about everything that is going on with set 10 and everything that you need to know, because inside of the dev drop, they weren't very specific. In today's video, we get to dive deeper and deeper into what set 10 has to offer. But before we start, I just want to quickly say thank you to everybody who was actually able to help me get into the playtest in the first place. This is my first time ever participating in something that is so insane. So thank you so much. It was such a great experience. And also a special shout out to Didi Simon as well, who, if you don't know, is also a Japanese TFT Twitch streamer who, I mean, he's Japanese, he speaks in Japanese on his Twitch stream, very popular in Japan, but he was actually the guy that I played like easily the most games with on the playtest. So shout out to him as well, because it was very hard to get games going on the playtest because there were so few of us who were actually playing within the playtest. It was very hard to get, 8 people on at the same time. So shout out to him and just the Japanese TFT community for letting me play with them. So thank you guys so much. But with that being said, let's finally start talking about everything you need to know about set 10 that was not covered in the dev drop if you're trying to play TFT this season competitively. First off, let's talk about the leveling changes. Obviously, as you may know, level 10 is now within the game and is a permanent staple within TFT. But what you might not know is that it actually costs less and less XP to get to these higher levels. As you can see on the screen right now, we're going to put up the exact values, but starting from level 5, it will cost less and less XP to get to level 6, level 7, level 8, level 9, and even to level 10 compared to before. This means that it's going to be a lot easier to try to hit that level 8 mark, that level 9 mark, if you're trying to go for those 4 costs, those 5 costs, and trying to cap out your board. What this also means, though, is that with the changes to the leveling system, shop odds have also been changed. So as you can see, again, I'll put these exact values up on the screen right now for you, but starting from level 7, as you can tell, the most important thing to note is that 4 cost odds have gone from 15% down to 10%. Now, I know 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're trying to roll on 7 for your 2-star 4 cost, at least from what it felt like in the playtest, you are fucking doomed. 10% is very low, and you can definitely feel the changes. You start to feel like you see way more 3 costs within your level 7 shops compared to level 8, level 9, etc. So definitely, if you're trying to put around 4 costs, you want to probably forward to it in level 8 and try to send it down then. That is probably my best advice. Now, the second thing I want to talk about are portals. Now, portals have already been announced and they've already been talked about how they're a bit toned down compared to before, but keep in mind that some of the portals that we already know are actually going to make a reappearance in set 10. For example, Scuttle Puddle, Shuriman Bazaar, Jace's Workshop, Mortal Bastion, and the University. These are just a few of the portals that will be making a return for set 10. But on top of that, like we said before, some are toned down. For example, there was a portal that was like Iron Mount, but instead of 3 component anvils, it was 2. There was another one that was like Glass Industries, but instead of getting 3 gold per item made, you got 2 gold. The next change I want to talk about, which is kind of minute, but not really that minute, because it's going to definitely help you to get to level 8, is that if you are taking unit losses that are larger than 4 unit losses, 5 unit losses, 6 unit losses, after the 4th unit, you're going to be taking 1 less player damage per unit. So for example, if you took a 5 unit loss, instead of taking 10 tactician health damage because of 5 units still left on your opponent's board, you are taking 9 instead, assuming you're not already hitting the maximum amount of damage that you could take during that particular stage. The next thing I want to talk about, and I'm amazed they didn't even mention this in the dev job because I thought it was really important, is that there are some item changes that are coming onto TFT. The first one is that RFC is fucking gone. God bless, that item is no longer in the game and it is being replaced with red buff, where now on attack speed carries, if you need that extra attack speed and you want to be doing some healing reduction, it's a very good alternative to have, which will deal wound, burn damage, whatever you want to call it, and reduce healing on your opponents, which is really cool to see. The second one that Mortdog, surprisingly enough, did already leak is that Night Harvester is gone, and it's actually being replaced with Steadfast Heart, which instead, now you take 8% less damage, and while you're above 50% HP, you will take 50% less damage instead. You can see that I'm looking at it on the right hand here, because I keep forgetting what it does. But it's a really cool tank item, and I think it's really great on units like Nico, so definitely keep that in mind when you're trying this new item out. Finally, let's talk about the set mechanic headliners. Now, I know a lot of people have been like, hey, Chosen and headliners, they're like the same thing. What the fuck? I didn't like set 4, I'm not gonna like this set. Bro. Dude, like, they're not the same. They're similar, but they're not the same. Headliners took inspiration from Chosen's. It's like a revamped and actually a lot more healthier version of Chosen's. At least whenever I talked to anybody who had played set 4 before and they got to playtest set 10, they had talked about how this feels way better than Chosen's. So let's talk about how the mechanic works. First off, if you do not already have a headliner purchased, you will see a new headliner within every single shop. Once you have purchased the headliner, you will see a brand new headliner within your shop in every 4 shops. Your headliner unit will also count towards a +2 within a specific vertical tree. So for example, let's say you had a headliner misfortune pop up within your shop. It could either be a +2 jazz or a +2 big shot misfortune. The second thing is that every headliner will have what's called a headliner effect. Now I know during the actual dev job, they sort of showcased it as if it was sort of like a hero augment-esque ability, or like the special effect that every unit gets if they become your headliner. While it's true that every headliner does have an effect, most of these are pretty tame. They were kind of showcasing the only minority ones where like something very different and cool changes. For the vast majority, again, they're mostly just stats. For example, a 4 cost like Ezreal, his headliner ability is just 50% bonus AD. Or somebody like Lulu, who is only a 3 cost, who her headliner effect is reduce her maximum mana by 10. Most of them are very, very tame. You don't have to worry about there being like a hero augment-esque ability incorporated inside of a headliner. That's not how this works. But now that we've gone over all the system changes and the set mechanic, let's now talk about all, I believe, 12 origins. It was a little hard to tell how many there actually were specifically, but there's 12 at least to me. That's what I saw. So just so you know real quick, we will also be doing a deep dive into each one of these origins throughout the next following days, throughout the PBE. Daily uploads are back, by the way, woohoo. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. The first origin let's talk about is 8-bit. Now 8-bit is a 2-4-6 trait where all 8-bit champions will gain 5% AD. But when your team deals damage, your score will begin to go up, and you'll see a little arcade boot pop up in the bottom right. It's pretty cool. But for every high score you've beaten, 8-bit champions will start to gain more AD. The premier 8-bit carry is Caitlyn, who is a 4 cost, who is also a rapid fire, where rapid fire units, by the way, they gain 10% attack speed, but they will gain more attack speed every time they attack. The next origin we're going to talk about is Country, which is a 3-5-7 trait, where when your team loses 40% of their HP, a Dead Steed, or Hecarim, will charge onto the battlefield and empower your country units. Each of the country star levels will increase its HP and AD, so you're kind of incentivized to reroll here a little bit. The premier carries, at least during the playtest, were Katarina, who was a 2 cost, Samira, who was a 3 cost, and Urgot, who was also a 3 cost. I think when people were able to hit Urgot 3, Samira 3, things were getting kind of crazy. And Katarina, I believe, was a little too overtuned during the playtest, but I believe they've already toned her down. Next up is Disco, which is a 3-4-5-6 trait, where you get a placeable disco ball, and on combat start, champions that will gain bonus stacking attack speed and are healed for a percentage of their max HP every 3 seconds. Now, if you played Jade back in set 7, it is very, very similar. And quite honestly, at least during playtest, I loved playing Disco. I think this was my go-to early game start. It felt really, really good playing within the vertical because the early game felt really good, the mid game felt really good, and the end game, it was okay. But being able to play around a 4-cost Blitzcrank Disco unit, who is one of the premier tanks of this set, felt really, really good. The other premier 4-cost within this tree is Twisted Fate, who is also a Dazzler. Dazzlers, for those of you who are unaware, their abilities will dazzle enemies for 2 seconds, reducing their target's damage by 25%, and then dealing a percentage of the ability's damage as bonus magic damage over the duration. Next up is EDM, which is a 3-4-5 trait. Now keep your ears open because this one is a little confusing. For EDM, you get to use the EDM selector to sample a champion. Periodically, EDM champions transform into the sampled champion, sampling their AD and AP and casting their ability. Basically, you get a selector. You get to use that selector on a specific EDM unit. For example, let's say you use it on a Zac. The rest of your EDM champions will turn into Zac periodically and then use Zac's ability to cast or whatever. I'm gonna be honest, this was a very difficult trait to play around, especially because there are not that many early EDM units. The only one is Jax, which is a 2-cost, and the rest of the units are 3-cost Lux, 4-cost Zac, and 4-cost Zed. From what I can tell, EDM seems like it's going to be a bit more of a skill expressive trait because it's sort of a trait that you sort of pivot into. It's not something that you are sort of expecting to play as the game progresses very easily. But my prediction is that once people get much more familiar with the set, we might see EDM become actually a bit problematic because once people figure out how to use it, it'll probably be slightly OP under the right circumstances. Next up is Emo, and this is a very simple trait. It is a 2-4-6 trait, and all Emo champions have reduced maximum mana. Whenever an ally dies, Emo champions gain mana. Simple enough. Amumu was one of the first units that was leaked within this vertical tree, who is going to be a 3-cost Guardian, but the premier carries are actually, funny enough, 3-cost Vex, who is also an Executioner, and 4-cost Poppy, who is a Mosher. Now, Moshers in general will gain bonus attack speed and Omnivant and increase up to 100% more based on missing HP. So they can be a carry, but they're kind of more of a bruiser at the same time. I know Iniko was talking a little bit during the playtest about how he kind of wants to see how Poppy carry works. It felt a little awkward, not gonna lie, but it still felt fine and definitely something to consider. But on top of that, a Mumu Vex reroll is also definitely a possibility and something to keep in mind when playing around the Emo vertical. Next up is Heartsteel. Now, Heartsteel is a 3-5-7-9 trait, and crazy enough, it is a very high vertical for our economy trait of the set. You get to earn hearts by killing enemies, and you can gain even more by losing player combat. Every 4 player combats, you convert hearts into powerful rewards. The number of hearts you gain increases for each heartsteel member in play. Now let's talk a little bit more about what that actually means, because there's some things that are different about this economy trait compared to previous sets. First off, you cannot keep stacking losses. You will cash out after every 4 player combats no matter what. So unlike things like Mercenary, things like Piltover, things like Underground, the stacking increased losses will not increase your rewards. You will only be able to stack within those 4 player combats. So let's say you go through 4 player combats, you cash out, you can choose, okay, do I want to keep playing into heartsteel and keep losing for more rewards, or do I just want to pivot out and play something else? You need to consider that after every 4 turns. This means that the only way to stack more and more hearts is within those 4 player combats, you decide to play upwards and higher within the vertical tree. So for example, let's say you won all of stage 2, for example, but you know during stage 3, you're going to be very, very weak. A potential strategy that may or may not work, I don't really know yet, but a potential strategy could be pivoting into 5 heartsteel for the mid game and then transitioning back out after you have cashed out. At least from what we've seen during the playtest, I don't think anybody had really figured out how to play heartsteel the most optimally, but that is sort of the general idea. But just so you know, you can definitely play within the vertical as well, even though the heartsteel trait doesn't actually give you any stats. But the premier 4 cost is Ezreal, who is a big shot, and Kayn, who is a 5 cost, who is a wild card edgelord. Next up, we got Jazz, which is a 2-3-4 trait, and this is easily my favorite trait. Your team gains bonus HP and deals bonus damage for each active non-unique trait. So Jazz really rewards you for playing flex and trying to play horizontally rather than vertically. So for example, instead of trying to play around 6 disco or trying to play around like 6 emo, you're trying to only play like 2 emo, 2 disco, fucking 2 hyperpop, 2 jazz, whatever, right? You're trying to create as many traits as you can, and that is a super, super cool trait to have within the set. Within these Jazz units, you have a 2-cost Bard, who's a Dazzler, 3-cost Misfortune, who's a big shot, and 5-cost Lucian, who is a rapid fire. Lucian was one of the premier 5-cost endgame carries that we saw during the playtest, so keep an eye out for Lucian and try to get him onto your board whenever you're trying to play horizontally across a lot of traits. Next up is KDA, which is a 3-5-7-10 trait. Now, all the units that start in the Lightened Hexes gain maximum HP, AP, and AD. KDA champions go all out, which double these bonuses. Now, there are a bunch of KDA units, but the premier carries are Ahri, who is a 4-cost, and Akali, who is a breakout executioner. Akali is a member of KDA or true damage, depending on which trait has more fielded champions, and then she gains a different ability depending on which form she takes. We'll talk about those future forms and how to get the most out of it in future videos. Now, these Lightened Hexes will change per game, and there's a bunch of different patterns that exist within the game. From the top of my head, I can only think of 3, but there might be 4 or even more than that. I don't really remember. But from what I can remember, there was about 3 or 4 different patterns that you can see for the Lightened Hexes. None of them felt better than the other per se, but the one that felt a little awkward to play around was the Diagonal Hexes. That one felt the worst out of all of them, but that's just my opinion. Next up is Pentakill. Pentakill is a 3-5-7-10 trait, another very, very high vertical. Pentakill champions deal more damage and take 20% reduced damage. Each time you kill an enemy, a Pentakill champion will become empowered and increase its bonuses by 50%. But if you get a pentakill or get after 5 kills, all your pentakill champions are empowered and your entire team gains 66% attack speed for the rest of combat. So basically, in very simple terms, you get more percent damage increase as you move up the vertical. That's a very simple way of thinking about it. The premier carries in this comp were actually units like Olaf, who's a 1-cost, and actually out of all the 1-cost rerolls, I think Olaf was the most dominant out of all of them. I think he's definitely getting a nerf before PvE drops later today, but nonetheless, he's still a very, very strong 1-cost to play around, and definitely I highly recommend you trying him. He's very fun to play. Get some Ginsu stacking since the BT's going, he's super fun. But on top of that, we also have Karthus, who's another leaked unit, who's in Pentakill, who's an Executioner, who felt very good, by the way. Very fun unit to play around. Definitely need a bunch of items on him. He's a very cool carry. And Viego, who is an Edgelord, who Viego, I believe during the playtest, was very, very slept on. Very cool AD carry as well. Definitely something to consider. And also, finally, as well, like we talked about with Poppy before, 5-cost Yorick, who is also a Mosher and Guardian. Now, Pentakill was actually one of the more popular verticals to play around because it felt so good to play into. I don't know how it's changed throughout the PB and the changes they made since the playtest, but I highly recommend trying to play Pentakill because it was definitely one of my favorite verticals along with Disco within the set. Next one we're going to talk about is Punk, which is sort of the reroll trait of this set, but it is a 3-4-5-6 vertical, and let's talk a little bit more about what it does. Punk units will gain bonus HP and AD, and this bonus is increased by 1% each time you spend gold on a shop refresh. After Punk's fight in combat, your first shop refresh costs 1 gold and grants plus 3%. So now if you're hearing this and you're thinking like, hey, that kind of sounds like supers, it's kind of similar to supers. The idea is that you're incentivized to try to 3-star your whole board because you want to be spending money on those shop refreshes. At least during the playtest, Punk felt decently strong, but it was definitely not a vertical that could win out lobbies. At least, again, this is during the playtest. I don't know how about now, but units like Jinx, units like Vi, and Pantheon Twitch are all of the Punk units that you can see within this vertical trait. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Aqua, who is a 1-cost reroller, is gonna just have a field day with this stuff, but Punk felt pretty fun to play, I'm not gonna lie. Despite it being a reroll comp and kind of a supers equivalent, it's still super fun to play, and it didn't feel too out of whack, at least during the playtest. It was really hard to win out lobbies with Punk. Next up is True Damage. True Damage is a 2-4-6-9 trait, and this trait you deal bonus true damage. Whoop-de-doo, who fucking knew? True Damage champions holding an item gain a unique bling bonus for their ability, and those bling bonuses will change depending on obviously which unit you are playing around. Now, True Damage has its premier carry being Akali, being the breakout executioner we have already talked about, but you also have units like Senna reroll, which can exist, which is a 2-cost, and also Kiana, who is a 5-cost crowd diver. I'm gonna be honest, out of all the verticals, I had the least experience playing True Damage. It was just not a vertical I found myself playing very often. Also, it just didn't help that at the time during the playtest, Yasuo, who was a 1-cost and very tempting reroll to play around, just never really did a lot of damage during the playtest. I think his numbers were too low and they buffed him. I think his numbers were too low and now they're buffing him, but regardless, I don't have a lot of experience with True Damage, but try it out. Let me know what you think. The final origin we're talking about is Hyperpop, which is a 1-2-4 trait. It's a very small vertical, but Hyperpop units will grant mana and 4 seconds of attack speed to their 2 closest allies after casting. You only have the 3-cost, who is a Lulu plus Spellweaver, and 5-cost, who is Ziggs plus a Dazzler. Now, Hyperpop is one of those traits I think we'll be seeing splash around often, especially if you're playing around Jazz, but it's also because the 5-cost unit Ziggs is very good at spreading AoE and March Red, so keep that in mind. But that is everything you need to know about Remix Rumble. Again, we'll go much deeper into each of the traits throughout the following week. We'll be making videos every single day talking about each one of these verticals, and if you want to get some PvE games in, we're going to be doing some viewer lobbies over on my stream. Feel free to check it out. Description is below. I think Sub-Zero Arc is coming to hang out if he's not working. But on top of that, I hope to see you guys soon, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next video. And until then, peace out, and shout out to the dev team. Y'all did such an incredible job. I just hit my microphone, but shout out to the dev team. You guys did a fantastic job with this set. This is easily going to probably be one of my favorite sets throughout the set, so this is gonna be super duper awesome, and I can't wait to see you guys soon on the PvE. Until then, take care guys, and happy climbing.